Well, kia ora, motueka whānau. I hope you are having a great week. This week in church, we talked about encouraging one another. Now, when I was a youth worker at Maidstone Intermediate, I remember mentoring this kid. We were mentoring his goal was to try and find some friends. And as you can imagine, he was not the most outgoing character, and he loved to play Minecraft, in fact. Now, Athletics Day came around, and again, not his favourite day of the year. Every student in the school had to do 2 laps of this track. It was 800 metres long. As youth workers, we'd decided to dress up and become superheroes for the day. So I was dressed head to toe as Batman. I had leather everywhere, and in hindsight, it was quite a tight-fitting kind of outfit, so probably not the best choice. But as I looked up, we were at the finish line. As I looked up, there I saw my mentee, this guy I'd been journeying with for 3 to 4 weeks. And he was right at the back of the pack. In fact, he was so far behind that almost all the school had finished these laps before he'd even done his first. He'd walked the entire first lap. And something about being a superhero just kicked into action. And so I thought, I'll just run with him. Now, I'm not the greatest runner, but this guy wasn't the greatest runner either. And so together, we made our way around the last 400 metres of this track. I ran alongside him. He ran as well, which was so encouragement. And by the end, actually, the entire school was cheering us on. They probably could see us struggling. But I think what we find in the Emmaus story today is Jesus encourages his disciples. I mean, his disciples had lost all faith, lost all hope. Their person they thought was going to save them and free them from the Romans had died. And so they're walking back to Emmaus. They're walking away from Jerusalem back to Emmaus as a way of kind of, well, that was that. We had fun, we're moving on. But what does Jesus do in the moment? How does Jesus encourage his disciples? He'd risen from the dead, and so the first thing he does is he walks. In fact, I only just noticed this about this passage, but Jesus, his first action as he comes up on the Emmaus Road is just to walk along beside them, to listen to their stories, to understand who they are. He doesn't say anything, he just walks alongside. And I think this is the first step of encouragement. Our first step of encouraging people is people just need someone to walk alongside them. Not to necessarily say anything, not to necessarily do anything miraculous, not to give them pleasantries or whatever, but just walk. As we walk alongside people, we encourage one another to keep going. The second thing that Jesus does to encourage his disciples in this moment when they've lost hope is he sees. He helps them to see. In fact, they say, are you the only person that hasn't heard the truth? And he starts from the very beginning of the Bible and opens their eyes to what must have happened, of how Jesus had to suffer and die in order for the world to be saved. He retells the story. He helps them to see what they cannot see. And I think when people are down, when people are discouraged, when people are not having a great time, you need to help them to see what they can. In my story, I helped this kid to see that he had value, to see that he could run, to see that he could finish. And I think in a Christian example, often the point that we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage people to see Jesus, to re-understand the gospel, to recommit, to be encouraged by what Jesus thinks of you. And so we help them to see the truth. Now, all of this, in the end, leads to Jesus and his disciples having a meal together. And he breaks the bread, and suddenly their eyes are opened to see who is standing in front of them. And they realize it's Jesus. And he disappears, and what's their first action? It's to return, to walk back to Jerusalem. They immediately go back, having understood and been encouraged by Jesus. They immediately return. And so I think this is the hope. This is my hope for this church, for all our churches, wherever we're meeting, that we would come together and be encouraged. We would be an encouragement to one another. We would walk beside people. We would recognize them and we would see them. That we would help people to see the truth and see the reality of life and help them to understand the gospel. And may we all be encouraged every time we come to church to actually return to the mission field, to return to being ambassadors for Christ, to return to being witnesses of Jesus. That's the hope. The hope is that church is an encouraging place where we build one another up and we are sent out returning to the mission field. So this week, I wonder whether we can intentionally turn to our friends, brothers and sisters and encourage them. Encourage them in some way. It's the challenge, it's the widow that we put out, but I think it is such an important part of Christianity and a real practical way of continuing to be church together and live life together. Have a blessed week.